Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. Let me start with some macro thoughts. Nothing comes even vaguely close to Black Monday in today's market. The Dow would have to drop about 5,300 points to see that kind of drop. David Inglis. Nassim Taleb says Black Monday is not an outlier. Have a listen to his little short video. And then from the stalwart, great intro here on how nobody cares about anything anymore in the market. Home thoughts, I return to somebody called Jeet Thayil, whose book is called Necropolis. How will the ships navigate without stars? And then he remembered that the stars were dead, long dead, and the light they shed was not to be trusted, was false, if not an outright lie, and in any case was inadequate, unequal to its task, which was to illuminate the evil that men did. Because now there's time enough not to hurry, to light the lamp and open the window to the moon and take a moment to dream of a great and broken city. Because when the day starts its business, I'll have to stop. These are nighttime tales that vanish in the sunlight like vampire dust. Put up a photograph of the book to which I was referring, Necropolis. Mount Whitney was the starting point for his FKT attempt on the iconic 340-kilometer trail. I like this from the Saatchi Gallery. Lips curl viciously upward in Gavin Turk's acrylic on canvas yellow sneer. And the sky over London turned red as storm Ophelia brings dust from the Sahara and smoke from wildfires in southern Europe. It looks like an apocalyptic scene. Maryan Gedi was to graduate this week as a medical doctor in Mogadishu, a tragedy in just one of 300. Jason Burke, The Guardian. More than 300 people, it's turned out, have now died in Mogadishu. It's really terrible. Sky blackened by smoke from fires in Vieira de Liera, Portugal today, stoked by unseasonal heat. This is not normal, is it? Russia is emerging as the new player in the Middle East balance of power. Russia intervened in Syria primarily because the country's civil war had turned into a petri dish for jihadists from the Russian Caucasus to Southeast Asia. America's long-standing support for Sunni jihadists had the unintended consequence of strengthening Al-Qaeda and its offshoot Islamic State, as General Michael Flynn famously warned, and the Sunni jihad threatened to spread to Russia's own Muslim population, which is overwhelmingly Sunni. Backing the Shiites was the Kremlin's obvious course of action. Moscow has achieved its objectives in Syria. The Assad regime is stabilized. The Sunni jihad is dwindling, and Russia's other perquisites in Syria, for example, its naval port facility at Tartus, are secure. Evidently, Russia now wants to take some risk off the table on the other side. And it really is a breathtaking intervention about which I wrote the day he did intervene and signaled he would at Unga. Lavrov says Europe is beginning to realize that without cooperation with Russia, it will lose political and economic influence. Trump's Iran strategy is a dream project for Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The US faces a Hobson's choice. It has the option of extricating itself from the Syrian conflict at the stage, claiming victory in the defeat of ISIS in Raqqa. But this would mean abandoning its Kurdish allies to their fate. Of course, if the US exercises this option, it paves the way for mending relations with Turkey. But then the flip side is that it also means a seamless expansion of Iranian influence in both Iraq and Syria, and a possible Iranian presence in the eastern Mediterranean. That, of course, would make a mockery of the tough strategy announced by Trump to counter Iran's regional policies. On the contrary, if the US intends to play a greater role in Syria following the capture of Raqqa, such as blocking Iran's land route to Syria, it would require substantial open-ended troop deployment to delay and harass the expansion of Iranian influence. Clearly, this is what the US's regional allies Israel, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are hoping for, and what Trump's new Afghan strategy promises to do. We'll see what phase 2 is, Trump said on the nuclear deal at his cabinet meeting. It might be a total termination. That's a very real possibility. North Korea is saying it's not interested in diplomacy with the US until it demonstrates the nuke is capable of striking the US East Coast. It goes back to my article, As Screaming Comes Across the Sky, Gravity's Rainbows, a 1973 novel by Thomas Pynchon, which is about the design, production and dispatch of V-2 rockets by the German military. In particular, it features the quest undertaken by several characters to uncover the secret of a mysterious device named the Schwarzgerät, the black device, slated to be installed in a rocket with the serial number 00000. As the world watches Pyongyang, I cannot help wondering if Kim Jong-un has read Thomas Pynchon, which speaks of a screaming coming across the sky. It is a curve each of them feels unmistakably. It is the parabola they must have guessed once or twice guessed and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving toward that purified shape latent in the sky, that shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return. Japan is having a snap election. I expect Shinzo Abe to come back with a slightly higher majority. There was a shocking assassination of a brave Panama Papers journalist in Malta. International markets, let's look at the currency markets. Euro dollar 117.57, dollar index heading towards 93.50, Japanese yen 112.22, Swiss franc 0.9778, the pound 132.54, the Australian dollar 0.7835, India rupee 64.895, South Korean won 1130.85, the Rial 3.1719, Egyptian pound 17.6003, and the Rand 13.3389. Dollar index, I'll put up a chart here, and 93.50 remains the key level. We kind of came off it, now back against it again, and at some point we're going to slice through it like a hot knife through butter. Euro dollar, this chart is from Jeet Commodity. My target remains 114.50, although clearly there are a lot of buyers lurking just below 117. Netflix shares rise in after-hours trading after Q3 subscribers beat estimates. From German to Brazil, Netflix stormed ahead in its drive to create a global television network, scoring the video streaming provider's best third quarter on record and sending the shares to a new high. Shows such as the thriller Ozark, starring Jason Bateman, American Vandal, a spoof of true crime shows, and a Jerry Seinfeld stand-up special helped lure 4.45 million customers abroad and 850,000 in the US, both ahead of estimates. Netflix rose as much as 4.1% to 211 in extended trading. The stock is up 64% this year. Commodity markets, let's take a look at gold. Gold back below 1,300 and back below 1,290 and 1,289 the figure. China is set to offer to buy 5% of Aramco directly. This is Reuters via Zero Hedge. WTI crude oil, $51.96. I think we're going to head higher because of the uncertainty that we're currently facing in Kurdistan. Emerging markets, Iraq's $1 billion of bonds due in 2023 slumped on Monday, with yields jumping to 7.29% or 61 basis points higher. Investors placed bids almost 7 times the amount on offer for Iraq's August bond sale, which came just 3 weeks after the country declared victory over Islamic State. Sale was part of a flurry of issuance from junk-rated countries including Tajikistan and Ukraine as borrowers sought to take advantage of demand for high-yield debt. We're living in a very low-yielding world and people are stretching their limits and going where they shouldn't be going. People are starting to cotton on to the fact that the Kurdistan issue has legs and things are going to get worse before they get better. Market hasn't taken Kirkuk fighting that seriously. Price of Iraq's 2028 Eurobond has fallen, but nothing like 2015-2016 when oil was cheap. This photo is from Howard French. It's his photo taken of when Gaddafi visited Thomas Sankara in Ouagadougou in December 1983. I wrote a piece in October 2011, Gaddafi's body in a freezer, what's the message? My piece over the weekend was taking Sub-Saharan Africa's economic temperature. That link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. And to wit, take a look at this chart, which talks about the biggest economies in Sub-Saharan Africa. And deciding which African economy will be the biggest at the end of the year will depend on which exchange rate you use. While the IMF reckons Nigeria will come out on top with $395 billion of output, it uses an average official exchange rate of 304 naira per dollar, which few companies or individuals get access to. Using the market-determined price for the naira, known as NAFEX, around 20% weaker than the official one, means Nigeria's GDP will be smaller than South Africa's 344 billion, according to RenCap. South African all shares up 14.83% year to date. This is a record high. Dollar versus Rand, halfway between that 13.70 point and 13.3368. Egyptian pound 17.60. The Nigerian government is facing criticism over an embarrassing Jacob Zuma statue. Nigerian all shares up 37.57% so far this year. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 35.34% so far this year. The Madagascar plague appears to have spread to the Seychelles. Plague, which is mainly spread by flea-carrying rats, is endemic in Madagascar. A large outbreak has killed 57 people since late August, according to the UN. Interesting interview Raila Odinga's given to the Financial Times. If the election went ahead without him, he said it will be a gross violation of the Constitution, basically a nullity, null and void. Did not support the succession of Western Kenya, where he has strong support amongst the Luo and Luya ethnic groups, but the debate about self-determination is gaining currency. When people become desperate, they resort to desperate measures, he says. Dismissed recent developments in the High Court and Parliament that could lead to a rerun on October 26 as inconsequential. If the election went ahead without him, he said it will be a gross violation of the Constitution, basically a nullity, null and void. Abdi Kadir Hussein, a government lawyer, said Mr. Odinga boxed himself in by withdrawing. Raila is blaming everybody and anybody but himself for his loss. Githonga said, although there had never been strong secessionist movements in the country, the impasse following the August election had ignited a discussion. It is a subject of intense debate. You have demonstrators walking around with flags saying People's Republic of Kenya, Mr. Githonga said. As a debate, I can categorically say this has legs. But he added the debate may not gain political traction because the big political beasts, including Mr. Odinga, had rejected it. Last month, 2 residents of Western Kenya lodged a petition at the High Court to hold a referendum on national and territorial rights for the area formerly known as the Eastern Province of Uganda and inhabited mostly by Luya people. David Ndii, a senior advisor to Mr. Odinga, who in August publicly discussed succession on Friday, said he did not support it, but were clearly in a political environment that could start hurtling downhill, and it could go in any direction, he said. The country is very divided. I wrote about this on the 9th of October when I spoke about a strategy of tension which will be maintained by degrading and denigrating the entire process, which is exactly what he's doing in that interview. And I said what is clear is that the advantage of incumbency in fact accelerates in this round 2 of the election. Therefore, I expect the opposition to boycott the election entirely. and that the strategy of tension will be maintained via degrading and denigrating the entire process. Market participants need to model this scenario because this is the direction of travel. NASA takes a day off street protests. That's from Nir Thakkar. And that took me back to my Paul Virilio quote in his book Speed and Politics. The revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production but in the street, but for a moment stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, machine of attack. In other words, a producer of speed. Drawn-out vote in Kenya increased risks for investors as the IMF. The prolonged elections increased risks for investors and traders. This in turn has led to a slowdown in economic activity. IMF lowered 2017 economic growth forecast for Kenya to 5%, lowest growth rate since 2012. Economic growth may pick up in 2018, assuming a return to a more normal, predictable political environment after the forthcoming elections and a modest improvement in agricultural production. The IMF will hold talks with the Kenyan government on a $1.5 billion standby facility that's meant to buffer the nation from excessive external shocks after elections are concluded. The facility ends in March and Kenyan authorities are expected not to draw on the resources. Nairobi all shares up 18.88% year to date, but it's corrected 8.618% off its 2017 high reached on August the 28th. Foreign investors recoil from the NSC on political temperature. Now, I was talking about the generalized upswing we've seen in equity markets across Africa, and as clearly within this generalized upswing across sub-Saharan African frontier markets, we're witnessing more investors adopt a more granular and nuanced strategy. And I think with the elections looming and political risk elevated, foreign investors became a lot more picky, and Kenya suffered because of that. NSE 20 is up 13.73% so far this year. It's corrected 11.917% off its high, 2017 high reached on August 15. According to OCHA, average price of livestock in Kenya has declined by up to 40%. And that explains a lot. Once again, thank you for stopping by.